Welcome to an LTTV special. Looking ahead to, well, I guess looking back first at what is one of the more fond memories of the Welford Road faithful, the 1993 Pilkington Cup run, if you will. The season itself is well known for not only the side recording a famous victory over Harlequins at Twickenham, but the run to the Cup Final itself at HQ is famous. More than 150 points scored, including a massive win over Exeter, 2 derby wins over Nottingham and Saints in the semi-final. And then one man who was no longer playing but was very much at the helm of that team was one of the more famous faces and names that Leicester Tigers fans know, and that's Ian Dosser Smith. So if you don't know Dosser, to give you some context, this book was published in 2014, I think, looking back at the history of Leicester Tigers. It doesn't even come close to comparing to what Dosser knows about the club. So rather than try and sift through this and give people some information, why not ask the man himself who was coaching the team that day alongside Tony Russ and obviously Paul Dodge. So first and foremost, Dosser, thanks for chatting with us.
Not at all.
1993, Dos, one of the most perfect cup runs that a side could have enjoyed.
Yeah. I'd become coach when I retired, and we had a group of players that I as coach inherited from the great David Matthews. We saw the potential. We were able to add to that group of players through the 90s, obviously culminating in Martin Johnson's great European Cup victories, championships galore. But a lot of the hard work was from that group of players. And the season itself was the centenary of rugby at Welford Road. And we were given the honour of playing against an England 15 at Welford Road in the September 92, beginning of that season, where we lost 18 points to 11, where Richard Hill, outrageous dummy up the short side, put paid to us. Being the sort of club that Leicester are, we allowed some of our players to play for England that day. Unusually, Dean Richards played in the second row. Imagine the poor people trying to lift him. We had the more agile number 8, Simon Pavois, and I think Steve Hackney scored the try, and Lilo kicked a couple of penalties. So the season began on quite a high note. We had high expectations in the league, although we only managed to finish third that season, before then finishing second, then winning, and then finishing second. And maybe talk about that a little bit later, how close we were to doing the double without winning either competition. The cup run, when we look back, the early cup runs in the 70s, we always seemed to be on the road. But it seemed to even out as time went on. And this particular season, we played Nottingham away. And why that was a special game was because one of the greatest Tigers of all time, Dusty Hare, was now director of rugby at Nottingham. And he took great pleasure in trying to wind me up before that game. Former teammates on opposite sides. And the winding up didn't stop when it got onto the pitch, because another former Leicester player, Dorian West, had moved to Nottingham, where Dusty had converted into hooker. And Dorian's nobbies, one of his close friends, was Dean Richards. Well, I think Dean Richards won by 5 knockouts. Never mind how many more points Leicester scored than Nottingham to go through to the next round. That was a great day. We then had a fixture against a team from the southwest called Exeter, who have now gone on to achieve great things. In those days, they were very much in the building process, and we managed to score 76 points against them on a really good day out. The semi-final was a game to remember for all those who were privileged to be a part or there. Tigers TV showed this recently, and it was billed as Shelford's game, because Wayne Shelford, coming to the end of his time at Northampton, he'd been a great servant there. So we arguably had 2 of the world's greatest ever number 8s in opposition. The chants of Dino that rang out that day, that ring out every time even when he brings his Newcastle side, or when he brought his Harlequins side to Leicester, still reverberates with us all. But it was a real physical encounter. Saints had picked a massive pack, and they expected to dominate against our very young and relatively experienced Leicester pack. The Cockerell, Roundtree, Garforth, relatively young and inexperienced front rowers. Paulie and Martin Johnson, who had played for England by this time, but still relatively inexperienced. Neil Back joined as I retired, and the experience came in the shape of John Wells, the captain, and Dean Richards, and they really took Saints to task. They created enough possession to allow Adele Cardooni and Jez Harris, the half-backs, to give opportunities for the boys outside. And there were some really, really good performances. That result, a big result, in every sense of the word, beating Northampton. Never mind, it was a semi-final of the Pilkington Cup. Beating Northampton, home, away, here, there or anywhere, was always something that the boys thrived on. And that gave us an added level of confidence moving towards Twickenham. It was for some of the guys, it was their first time there. So there's a little bit, I sense, apprehension. As you mentioned, Rusty was our director of rugby. I was the coach with Paul Dodge, and Paul and I had played in a few finals together, won a few. And so it's a well-trodden pathway, not least because Paul had played for England and captained England and knew Twickenham inside out and upside down. We were able, we felt, to give the boys some understanding of what it was going to be like. And they really, really did rise to the challenge. Although it didn't get off too well, because we left Leicester. We never used to travel down the night before. We used to travel on the coach on match day, go to a hotel near to Twickenham at Heathrow, and then get a police escort in. We got on the coach, we leave the ground, and then I'm informed by the team secretary, Tudor Thomas, that we'd left a player behind, Martin Johnson. No mobile phones, and thank God for Mr. Johnson, Senior Dave Johnson, drove his son down. I'm anxious at the hotel. I said, we can't wait any longer, but luckily they arrived just as we're leaving to get to the ground. It was particularly important that he was there, as he made an even bigger contribution than usual, managing to roll over for a try in the second half, will effectively sealed the result. The emotion of the guys before the game, and what I've managed to dig out from my boxes, is the photograph that was taken before the game. And these were reproduced after the game, and you can see at the bottom, Pilkington Cup winners 1993. You look how young some of these guys actually looked and were. Cockers looks about 10. Even Dean only looks 50. Darren Garforth, well, he always looks like 83-year-old old boy, doesn't he? Remarkable. And we had a group on the bench who were able, if required, remember the laws were different then, to come on and play their part. I look back, I found in the pile as well a programme from that day. And of course, playing against Harlequins, in the old days, Leicester used to play Harlequins in September. And we used to play at Twickenham in the club fixture, not at the Stoop, because the Stoop was not what it is now, certainly. And playing at Twickenham when there was about 2 men and a dog, not 1 man and a dog, 2 men and a dog, it was an interesting experience. And there's a big piece in there because one of the greatest players, one of the greatest open sides ever to grace the field was Peter Winterbottom, who's coming to the end of his career. He was an old adversary of mine, and in the 1989 semi-final, where we went on to lose to Bath in the final, he and I had a bit of an up and downer in that game. But we managed to get Dusty, never mind the club, to Twickenham for Dusty's final game for Leicester. Sadly, we weren't able to bring him home with the cup in his last game. But Dusty and I were last out of the changing room, as we often were, and we had a chat as we walked through. Peter Winterman, one of the all-time greats. And they'd made a selection in the back row, which had made me question. I've been talking to Dodgy about it all week. And as we took our seats, it came to me what they were going to do. They were going to push up on Jez outside to try and push him back inside and then to smash him. Well, the gods were with Leicester and Jez Harris, because the nimble chap stepped, popped through the gap, created space, banged the ball downfield, moved the ball at will, which created opportunities, which started the move, in fact, that led to the Stuart Potter try in the first half. Potts, not regarded as perhaps one of the quickest men, but he was one of the best organised and strongest men. And some people, rather unkindly, would say his greatest contribution to Leicester was after he'd had a couple of glasses and he became a very different character, more outgoing, shall we say. But I don't care about that, because when he went through that gap, threw an outrageous dummy and raced over the line, I don't know what speed he was going at, but he was quick enough to outpace. I think Carling was coming after him. But Potts went over, and of course Potts himself ended up as an England international. So that got us off, having been 7-0 down. Glenister scored a try in the same part of the pitch that Steve Kenny had scored a try against Moseley in the 79 final. It was similar. It was a bit further out. He picked the ball up at the base, a little bit. I know Steve's was off for scrum, but it was that same idea of show and go, and he was through, and our defence was left wanting. But even at 7-0, to say we were quietly confident, it didn't shake the boys. It didn't shake Dodgy and myself. And then, of course, Potts brought it back. Great John Liley kicks 7-all. Penalty, they get 10-7, then 10-all. And then I think Jez pulled out one of his drop goals to knock us into the lead. They get a penalty. And then, was it the moment of the game? Well, given what Jono went on to do, I think he and all the Leicester faithful will look back on the moment with great, great affection. We used to have a penalty move, pivot move, and Leicester had been doing that, I think, since the year dot. And it was reminiscent. In 83, when we lost to Bristol, I managed to fall over the line from a similar move. I ran on a slightly different line to the one that Jono took, but it was about decoys. And Jono took the ball, again at some pace. Now, if a side are defending that close, just inside the 22, I think it was, and they see we're going to run, you'd think that our players ready to pick up the big guns. Well, I think we should have christened him Johnson Moses after that, because it was a bit like the Red Sea. And he went through and he got over the line. And when that ball went down, I wasn't one given to showing my emotion during the game, because I never quite sure who was looking and who was listening. But I did allow myself to look at Paul, and our eyes met, and there was a nod of, we're moving in the right direction here, boy. Lilo again. But then, to Quins' credit, they came back at us. They came back at us with force. We had opportunities to score without putting the game out of their reach. And then it was required late on for Lilo to kick a penalty to push us out. And there's an enduring moment for me right at the end of the game where Adele Cardooni, I think he must have got his stepladders out, because he jumped up at Jono. And Jono's holding. Now, again, Jono is the over-emotional sort of guy. So I don't know whether Adele took him by surprise, but the little scrum half being held by Martin Johnson, and then he almost chucked him away and then moved on. And then you see after the game, in those days, the supporters racing onto the pitch, embracing the players. And having experience being on the pitch when the final whistle goes and the supporters getting onto the pitch, it's like every ounce of oxygen that you needed during the game, you're running on empty, but the supporters take all that's left. There's no air. And all you want to do is to get off. But it's Leicester. And our supporters over the years have been as significant in victory as the players on the field. I think they're quoted that the Leicester supporters outnumbered the Quins something like 4-1. The sea of red, white and green that accompanies Leicester wherever they played. Paris was a classic example. It could have been a home game. It could have been a home game. Nobody expected that. The 59,000 people that saw Leicester play that day. Leicester were renowned for attracting big crowds. Over the years, Leicester's first cup final doubled the attendance to 24,000 when they played Gloucester. There were world record crowds going right through when we played against Bath. 75,000 people. I think Bath brought a few as well, to be fair. And I think Quins brought a few. But to have that support, and when the boys went up to get the trophy, Leicester has been blessed with some great people. And not just in recent years with players, but people who have played and been a part of the club. John Allen, Eric Lacey, Tudor Thomas. Graham Willers was in the committee box there, and his smile on his face was the biggest in Twickenham. He played for the club for many years, and believe it or not, he's the Tiger who's the oldest. He had to come off the bench against Waterloo when Dean got injured, and Laurie Connor was playing for Waterloo, and he put it about a bit. And I was on the pitch. I said to Graham, look, Laurie's off on one. Let's be calm down. And Graham said, yeah, we need to be calm. First thing Graham did was smack him. Well, all hell broke loose. So Graham, what was Graham, 50-something? Crazy, man. He was there. But there's an interesting little snapshot for me, because on one of the photographs, as well as he lifts the cup, there's a little boy applauding, sneaking his head in the photograph. And that little boy is not so much a little boy now. He's better known as the head coach of the academy. And Matt enjoyed some great times watching Tigers. But in the committee box, a few rows back, was the man who had left Leicester to take up a full-time position with the Rugby Football Union, getting on for 11 years before. He was the man on the playing side who drove things. David Matthews was always there and thereabouts, but Chalky was the coach. And he had a group of players who he was able to get the best out of. And Paul and I were lucky enough to be coached by the great man as teenagers. And it was as though he was there looking down and seeing his youngsters actually grow and see now maybe they don't need me anymore. You know, they've coached a cup-winning side. The thing was, I was always kept in contact with Chalky. Once a month we'd be on the phone for an awful long time. He would always insist on ringing me 1 month if I rang him the month before, so the phone bill wouldn't rise, because we'd be on for quite some time. You know, the influence of people like Chalky, David and the like runs through the club to this day. And that was a very, very, very special day. After the game, of course, when the celebration started, I remember vividly last to leave the changing room. And as I was leaving, I realised the cup was still there. So I thought, oh, I better pick that up, take it with me. I started off to the old West car park restaurant, and the commissionaire in all his glory said, "Where's your pass?" I said, "You're joking?" He said, "No, where's your pass?" I said, "I'm a Leicester coach. We've just won the Pilkington Cup. Here it is. You haven't got a pass, you're not coming in." So I bang on the window. Richards is looking at me. I signalled to him to get me a pass to come in. He gets all the boys, and they're all standing there looking at me, laughing, shaking their head. Eventually, Dean comes out, and I give the bloke the pass, and Dean said, "This is our coach, what are you doing? I haven't got a pass, not coming in." So I got as many people as I could to give me passes. I went outside, I found as many Tiger supporters as I could, gave them all a pass, and I said to the commissioner as I walked back in, "Yeah, they've all got passes now, mate." It was beyond remarkable. Playing is one thing, but to be able to be a part as a coach, to watch the players achieve what they did that day and what they went on to achieve is something extra special. You look at the people in the crowd, you listen to the people, and you see what it means to them. And at this time, as we've said, it's unprecedented what's happening throughout the world. And if ever there's a time when people need a boost, it's now. And what a boost that will be when the Leicester faithful return to Welford Road, and hopefully return to see Leicester return to their winning ways in cups, in leagues. And we'll see then what it means to the people of Leicester. You cannot underestimate what it has meant over the years to our loyal supporters. And even now, people come up to me, but it does get a bit when I have people who say to me, "Yeah, you coach my grandfather." And I think even I'm not that old, but of course, people love it when they hear things like that. So the day, the lead up, the post-match stuff will live with us all. And that's just one cup final, one great day. And Leicester have been very fortunate to have had many. And I like a lot of the people at Leicester have been fortunate to share in some way in these magnificent, magnificent times.
I want to ask you about Welford Road. I know that the final was obviously at Twickenham, and we are talking about the final, but as you say, it was on LTTV a couple of weeks ago now, the semi-final. 2 points on that. One is it's a famous day because it was the first ever derby day for one Richard Cockrell. And we know what Richard was like when he first arrived, and certainly what he was like when he moved into the coaching box. But the second point for me is, what was your message as coaches that day after you've won a semi-final and you're heading to Twickenham? You know you're going to be playing in front of almost 60,000 people. What's your message to a team that's just beaten Northampton? How do you keep their feet on the ground at that time?
Listen, people who have played with me and worked with me will know that that's never been an issue for me or anybody else around me. We have standards that we don't expect, we demand of people. And having the lights of Richards and Wells out on the field made sure that nobody was ever going to get ahead of themselves. We'd have a cup of coffee and a bit of fun before the game to try and ease things. The conversations in making sure that we knew what we expected of each other as players, as coaches, as forwards, as backs, but we never got ahead of ourselves. Even though we'd had a great victory against Northampton, we never saw it as a right that we would win the final. We know in life, in rugby, you have to earn everything. And those boys earned that victory that day. They were on the edge in terms of emotion, in terms of performance, in terms of understanding, in terms of desire, all the things that come together. And we used to speak before games to make sure that everybody was ready. And that team was as ready as any team I'd ever played in and ever coached. And when they took the field, there was an expectation. If Leicester play as well as they can, they would win. And Leicester played not quite as well as they could, because I referred to the missed chances. But they played well enough, more than well enough, and they were justly crowned Pilkington champions that day.
I want to ask you about selection for the game, because as you say, there were some incredible players in the squad. You talked about the fixture early on in the season, and there were some guys floating around who didn't get a chance to play in that game, but have certainly carved out impressive careers for Tigers. One in particular is you've got Rory and Tony Underwood on the wings that day, two of arguably the greatest finishers not only Leicester's seen, but the game has seen. But that meant a certain person missed out, didn't it?
It did. Steve Hackney, who had joined Leicester from Nottingham, he came over with a small group. Wayne Kilford, Stuart Potter, Backy was already over. And I would, not just metaphorically speaking, but literally stand in front of a mirror and ask myself questions about selection. When I became the coach, we removed the responsibility of the final say in selection from the captain to the coach. Tony Russell's our director of rugby. He felt it was more appropriate for the coach. Dean and I had the conversation, we agreed. So I had to do a lot of soul searching. And that soul searching manifested itself that day in me choosing the two Underwoods, obviously in consultation with Dodgy, in front of Steve. If I wind back, at the beginning of my coaching career, when I was captain and picking the team, we had a lad at Loughborough College as it was, Loughborough University, playing in the back row, and another homegrown talent who had come through the academy. And I had to make the decision, and I went with Adrian Marriott, Shodder, the blacksmith, one of the best back row forwards Leicester have ever had, demon tackler, which meant leaving John Wells out. John came to me and said, "Why haven't you picked me?" And I gave him various reasons. "Why haven't you picked me?" Gave him various reasons. "Why haven't you picked me?" I said, "Listen, John, you're a good player. You're going to be a great player. My gut is telling me AD should play and not you." Right, that was it. He went away, played a few games for Loughborough, then started playing for Leicester. The rest is history. Very few players have confronted me in that way. Steve Hackney did. He wanted to know why he wasn't picked. And it is difficult because they have different qualities. But is it a get out? I had to say in the final analysis to him, it's a gut. I think what is best for the team. And of course, it'd been best for the individual, Steve Hackney, if he had been selected. But what was best for the team was to play Tony and Rory on the wings. What was best for the team was to pick that midfield of Jez, Batesy and Potts. What was best was that Adele was at scrum half. What was best was we had those youngsters in that pack. And before, during and after, when, metaphorically speaking, I'm still looking in my mirror, I'm still questioning. And that has been the same throughout my career. There's been some really tough decisions, and that was not an easy one to make. If you look at the lads who were on the bench, they were delighted to be a part of it. Lawrence Boyle, who managed to get on as replacement in the semi-final and waltz over in the corner. But what a bloody idiot he was. He turned up and he'd only got one boot. So we had to find him another boot, not on this occasion, on another occasion. And he ended up playing for Harlequins. He left Leicester and went down to the big city and played for Harlequins. Selection is always about opinions, and I feel for anybody who has to make any sort of selection, because we're rarely going to agree, but you're charged with the responsibility of doing the best for your team, for your club, as the man who has the final say. And I firmly believe that this was the group that were going to give us the best chance of coming home with the silverware that day.
I guess it's the headache that coaches always talk about that they want to have, isn't it? That you have more options than you need. But one thing Leicester has always been built on, and it shows that it's not just those teams of the early 2000s. This shows that it was further and further back, that it's those guys who might not necessarily play on the weekend that are just a bigger part of preparing a team and making sure, you know, the biggest compliment you can give to Steve Hackney is that he was in contention for a spot with two of the greatest wingers the game's ever seen in Rory and Tony. So the fact that you had a squad at that time that was capable of preparing a team to go out and do what they did in that final, it must have been a headache you enjoyed having.
I wouldn't use the word enjoyed. It was a great position to be in. And I remember the press quoting me. I said, cups, caps, trophies, they don't motivate Leicester. It's all about performance. And of course, somebody said, it's easy to say when you've got a squad like he's got. Well, that squad took a while to get together and to build. And because of the closeness that the boys had, that was able to be demonstrated on the field. And if you fast forward to 95, we had to beat Bristol at home to win the league, to secure the league. Most of the England players weren't allowed to play because of the World Cup. Dean played as captain. So Rory, Tony, Backy, Graham, Jono, they weren't allowed to play. And the boys who came in did more than a job, because Leicester beat Bristol, Leicester won the league, and I was convinced, as I could be, that the following season we would do the double, only to cruelly, in two incidents, have it torn from the grasp. The final against Bath, the penalty try. It's not so much the penalty try. We had chances that day to a sealed victory and we didn't. We lose by a point. I think we lost to Harlequins at Welford Road. And if we'd have won the league. And there was a kick at goal by John Liley. To this day, I'm convinced it went over. Sadly, the referee didn't agree. So we lost the league by the 1 point, and we lost the cup final by a point. But this was all part of the process of growing into that side that reached the European Cup final in 97. But I have to say, that was a greater performance by Breve, a greater performance I've seen by any rugby team anywhere in the world at any level. Then moving forward, then Dean takes over and pulls things in, pulls people in, and then we move into the 2000s. We saw what happened there. Don't forget this group of players. Please don't forget them. Because, again, it's about opinions. Was Wheeler's 70s side the best? They were the best there was at that time. That was something to achieve. Interesting, look at how few players played in those cup finals over those 3 wins. And remember, you could only come on for an injury. So the squad, again, wasn't big. But crikey, we had some players. It was said about get the ball to the backs. and the forwards were papering over the cracks. The forwards did an all right job, I'll tell you. Then the European Cup bunch. Well, I turned to David Matthews after Leicester had won that final in Paris, and I said, "What do you think?" And he nodded, and I said, "Greatest day in the club's history, without a shadow of a doubt." It was. But I repeat, please don't forget these boys. They put some of the building blocks in. They were the group who had to endure the transition from training 2 nights a week to professionalism. It was unheard of. But they helped to secure the building of the next generation of the future. And they shouldn't be forgotten. And what a group they are. Some of them went on to become household names. Some of them may slip through people's memories. How many people will remember Jez Harris? But without his drop goals and without his guile in that final, there'd be no victory. Bates's workmanlike, unheralded. Steve Hackney, as we've said, with those with the Underwood boys. You know, the pack of forwards all went on to do some things remarkable. An incredible group who deserve far more praise than maybe they've been afforded in the history. Remember, at the end of that 93 season, we went to South Africa. And that is the last tour. I remember saying, Dodgy unfortunately couldn't come. So Kiwi, Andy Key came with me as the backs coach. And I remember saying, I think this will be the last tour of its kind. There was a feeling. John Wells captained the side and then were unbeaten. And it just shows you, doesn't it? The first time Leicester Tigers had a mascot, Ian Bates captained the 15 and the little boy Smith ran out at the front of the team. And there's a photograph somewhere of him doing that. And the boys were incredible. Could you imagine that? Cockerell, Roundtree and Garforth entertaining my 2 children, taking them up and down in a glass lift once or twice. But when he got to, I don't know, it seemed like 227. Even they were getting a bit tired. But that stood them in good stead for when they had their children, didn't it? So we're talking about special people. And Leicester Tigers are fortunate that they have a stream, a core of very special people indeed. On the field, off the field, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, in every generation. And we can say that the last couple of seasons haven't gone as well as everybody would have hoped. But there's a new sense of expectation, of excitement, of belief that Tigers are going to start to climb, are going to get back. It has gone in cycles. Leicester were away, then Bath came, then they were away, then Leicester came back. Then Wasps came knocking, Saracens, Exeter. It's a movable feast, the development of the game, the development of clubs. But with the foresight that Leicester has shown, we have every chance of success moving forwards. And where does the success come from? Tom Crumby, who is the first secretary the stand was named after. You know, there are moments that are glowing examples of something extra special in the club's history. Prince Oblensky scored 2 tries for England against the All Blacks and tragically died in an aircraft accident. God knows how many times he'd have played for England. Lord Wetherell Wakefield, who played for Leicester, and the contribution he made through his charity. But the people who I've come to know and been lucky enough to know as a supporter watching from the bank, David Matthews, John Allen, my old rugby master, Mike Harrison, who sent me down to the Tigers as a young kid. Then being a youngster as part of this setup, and then being a senior player, and then a coach, and then this, and then that. You know, this group that you're highlighting with this 93 final, they deserve a very, very special place in the club's history. And every man jack of them. And there are some people who aren't on the photograph that I showed you, who didn't make the cut for the squad on the day. But without their contribution, that group wouldn't have been in the position that they were to achieve what they did on that day. Remarkable men.
I want to ask you about one remarkable man that you referenced, who you might say actually helped you win that day because he noticed that Martin Johnson wasn't on the bus. It was this week 2 years ago that rugby and the club lost Tudor Thomas, one of the greatest men that Leicester Tigers has seen. What was his involvement and what was his impact on you?
Well, in rugby terms, I told you that Paul and I met each other playing for Leicester under 14s. The team manager was Tudor Thomas. So it's no coincidence that our friendship grew through my time at Leicester as a first team secretary. What Tudor used to do, initially he was the extra secretary. Harry Simpson, the former Tigers Open side, he was a secretary when I first got into the team. Tudor became the first team secretary, and when players became fathers, he would say, we used to get a green card, which you knew you were selected for the first team, and he would send you a green card for the selection of your sons when they were 18. So he'd post-date the selection. He was very much the heart and soul. He was the choir master. That was probably one of the most embarrassing moments in Tigers history, when on the centenary tour in 1980 in Fiji, the Fijians sang. Well, every Fijian can sing, like every Welsh person seems to be able to sing. And Tudor wanted us to sing. My God. Tudor has a voice, but the rest of us, dear God, we don't have voices. He would do things. I was at college and there's no direct route back. He would drive me from Leicester to Rugby to catch the train after training. We would race to make sure I got the train. He would look after players' children. Him and Barbara were just amazing. He would be there for us all. He would enjoy a pint, he would enjoy a chat. And you could see the way the players thought of him. He wrote a book, his autobiography. And I remember saying to him, oh, we'll have to sort this out then if you're going to do that. We'll get a sponsor. No. I'm just going to give this book to certain people. Well, I was fortunate enough to be one of those people he gave the book to. And it's an incredible life that he's led. From his days in North Wales as a young boy, how he came to Leicester, how he moved to be a headmaster, how he got some boys from very difficult backgrounds into rugby, some of which came to the Tigers and became first team players. He was more than just one aspect. He gave people a friendship, a loyalty, and enabled them to be themselves, to be the best that they could. You know, some time ago, I moved away from saying about being the best, telling people they should be the best, wanting to be the best. All we can hope is that people are going to be the best that they can be. And if you're fortunate to be a Leicester Tiger, and if you're fortunate to have been under the influence at some stage of Tudor Thomas, you have a considerably higher chance of being the best that you can be. Not just on the rugby field here, we're talking about off the rugby field. In the book I told you about, he had a photograph he'd taken of me in 1982 in Zimbabwe. We went, the whole squad went in these light aircraft over the Victoria Falls. Well, I'm not a great flyer, and I shouldn't have gone. And they persuaded me to go. And Steve Kenny and I can't remember who the other one was, but we were in there with another young couple on their honeymoon. And Steve said, "Oh, look, there's an elephant." And the pilot said, "Where?" I went, Well, my stomach was still up there, part of it. Part of it was down there. And when we got down, I was not well, and Tudor took the photograph. And that's when we heard the immortal words. The pilot was a Spitfire pilot during the Second World War, and he was from Yorkshire. And I said to him, "Listen, if Yorkshire is so bloody wonderful, how come everywhere we go, we meet people from Yorkshire? Easy, lad, we're spreading the gospel." Of course, Martin Whitcomb, he thought this was fantastic. Yeah. Tudor, wherever we were, whatever we were doing, he was there for us all. And a kinder man, you'd find it very difficult to be. He was very, very good friends with the great David Matthews. He was exceptionally good friends with Derek Limage, our groundsman. So for Tudor, it didn't matter who you were, what you were. A shared interest, which happened to be rugby. Of course, he was an English teacher. He was outstanding. But what he achieved at the school where he taught was a headmaster, Westcoats, and his previous school, New Parks. He was renowned for getting the best and doing the best for his pupils. And he was renowned for doing the best and getting the best out of his charges at Leicester Tigers. And there were moments, people talk about at Leicester, when he used to ask the crowd to hush. You can almost try something. Go to the ground and listen very carefully. And if you listen with the right sort of ear, you might actually pick up Tudor saying, "Shh," or Chalky shouting, "Run faster up the bank," when we used to have the bank. Or David questioning who hit him from behind in a training session. And to this day, nobody ever divulged to him who it was. But I know that he knew who it was. And Dean Richards, you should be ashamed of yourself. Those moments that we've all been lucky to be a part of and continue to be a part of, is something special.
I guess, I'm blown away by this because I don't think there's anybody, and I don't mean to embarrass you at all, but certainly in my time around Leicester Tigers, I don't think I've met anybody or heard from anybody who speaks as emotionally and passionately about the club as you. And that's not to take away from anybody else, but any conversation with you, and I know anyone would say the same, it's an education, it's an experience. So I'm going to put you on the spot to finish this because you opened the door to it. You've been involved with some incredible teams as a player, as a coach, as a mentor, and then indirectly as a father watching their son play for what were some incredible teams for Leicester Tigers too. Dossa, what is, or which team is the greatest Leicester Tigers team of all time?
There are players who play for Leicester, and there are Leicester Tigers who play for Leicester. Just because you're in the team, it doesn't make you a Tiger. And some of the players who are fantastic have become some of the greatest Leicester Tigers. And that doesn't mean that you're a British Lion. It also doesn't mean you've only had one game. There are people whose contribution, who sometimes is missed. Chalky, in a conversation with a group of us one time, said to us, "You're like the royal family." And that's not the television series, City Watching Television. He means the royal family. And we were all amazed at this. He said, "You lot who were born in Leicester, who have played for Leicester Tigers and become Leicester Tigers." I myself was born a couple of miles from the ground. Matt was born in the Leicester General. You know, his son was born there. Massive, massive that we know that my grandson is the seventh member of the family to be born in Leicester, seventh generation. How many more before that, God knows. The greatest side, how do you measure it? By results, by performance, by individual achievement, a combination of which. Lewis Deacon had a testimonial game, and there'd been no game at Welford Road for some time as it happened. More people came to watch that game than watched any Premiership game anywhere in the country that day. Why? Because this group of players agreed to don their boots one more time with a few others. This group are held in a very special high regard. And where I would say being part of any team at Leicester is special, as player, as coach, as a physio, as the media man. This group, I think, would edge it because having to go through that transition. We knew where we were starting from. We knew where we hoped to be, but getting there and what happened on the way was not easy. Some of them found it too difficult. That wasn't for the lack of trying. Some of them were coming to the end of the road anyway, but a lot of them formed the foundation for what has happened more recently. And so I'm sure if you speak to 1,000 people, you won't get 1,000 different answers. I'm not sure whether you get a very high percentage in acknowledging this group of players. But from my view, every Leicester Tigers team is special. Every Leicester Tigers team is great because they're part of it. And as I say, it's not something being at Leicester that you can touch, that you can taste. It's something you can feel. And you know. And I've said many times, being a Leicester Tiger is everything. Having a son who's a Leicester Tiger is everything and more. And to be able to see now the young guns, look how successful the academy's been. But that's not something new. The original youth team. Dodgy was the first out of the youth team. Then came Steve Kenny. Then a bit after that, Granite and myself, Jess Critch. We had a whole group of youngsters coming through, and we've reconnected with that. And we are reconnecting with that, with Jack Van Voortfleet getting his first start this season. I'm so fortunate because I've been coaching at Oakham School, and we've managed to have a few lads, Matt and Crofty, who've come out, Jack Van Portfleet, Sam Costello, Cameron Jordan, all these boys, and they've added something to Leicester Tigers, and Leicester Tigers have added something to them. So the greatest team, by the smallest whisker, the greatest group, I would have to settle on the 93, 94, 95, 96, and if they had done the double in the 96, would that made them any more special a team? To some people, because they'd have done a double. But to me, as a Leicester Tiger, first and foremost, not a coach, not a player, as a Leicester Tiger, it doesn't diminish in any way from that group. And the club, the supporters, and myself will be eternally grateful for what they've given and what they've enabled the club to do. And you will see. So to all the people who are thinking, oh, is it going to be Leicester this? Wait and see. Wait and see. They'll be back. Bigger, better, stronger, faster. And you will see as time goes on, I think Jordan has now got a group around him that will enable him to ensure that the future is going in the right direction.
I'm almost speechless, to be honest. I think someone might be cutting onions nearby, but it's incredible. As I said before, Dossa, I love hearing your stories. Admittedly, there's a couple I've heard that we can't probably put on tape, and they're probably some of the better ones, but that's the great thing about rugby, isn't it? So I'm sure if anyone does see Dossa when we are back at Welford Road again, get him to tell you a story, because it's a worthwhile experience. And as I said, it's an education.
If you want one, to give a bit of a balance, because I don't get carried away. That's just the way I am. I tell it as it is, as I see it. But I remember en route to one cup final, we used to leave from the post house, and I was in reception. I'd actually watched all the players, and somebody's missing. So I went to the gents to check, and I just moved the door ajar. One player had clearly had something of an accident, as he was standing on his tiptoes and forcing his groin up to the hand dryer to dry the rather large patch on his trousers. I very discreetly allowed the door to close, smirked, hit the door. Any players left? Come on. That player, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but he was, he's played at the very highest level of the game, and coached at the very highest level of the game. Yeah. I smile to myself, because how big does he think he is that he can put his groin up there to drop? I'm thinking, what the hell? Anyway, there are moments of hilarity that have sprinkled through all of this. That it's easy to pigeonhole them somewhere else. And as you say, there are things that I think are best left between the people that were involved. When asked periodically, am I going to write a book? I say to people, well, the things that most people would want to read, I don't think they get by the lawyers. And there are some things, there are some emotions, there are some conversations I've had with players have been between them and me, and will always remain between them and me. That cup final we talked about the Bath one, losing by a point, was probably the most difficult day in my Leicester Tigers history. The emotion that swept through. I'll finish with one little bit of amusement. They came to us and they said to Dean and I to go on television to do an interview after the game. And I said to Dean, come on. And he was a little reluctant. He'd already got his kit off and got his towel on. Well, Richards gives an interview to the BBC in his towel. And I'm stood there. And all I'm thinking about, one of those bastards is going to come out in a minute and whip the towel down. And so whatever Dean said, I didn't hear. And I'm sure I repeated what he'd said. And anyway, we got back into the changing room. We go. Stuart Barnes said to me that day, he said, Bath didn't win this. Tigers lost it. And talk about hitting to the core. I said to Wheeler, I want some money. He said, what do you mean? I said, win, lose or draw, the team and the coaches, we always have just a couple of beers together. And we used to stop at a village called Toddington on the way out of London. And he said, leave it with me. And he said, I'm coming with you. We pulled into Toddington and the inevitable red, white and green. See off. They were shouting and applauding. They open a pathway up to the pub. I go in and there's probably 32 people on the coach. Yeah, most of them were players, not like it is now, a million of this. So I go to the bar, so I order 64 pints of Guinness, 2 pints each. All right, we're good. 2 pints of Guinness, out we come. We're waiting, and I'm thinking, somebody's missing again. And I noticed that one of them had gone off to the fish and chip shop. One of them hadn't got his glasses or his contacts in. And all the supporters laughing and cheering and whooping. And as the player gets to the bus, up the curb, flat on his face, everybody goes wild. Funny, I'd seen that player somewhere else in a toilet trying to dry himself. Interesting. You know, say lightning doesn't strike. It did with that player. But great times made up of great people. Hey, what a club Leicester Tigers is. What a club.
As I said, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. And for anyone, watching from start to finish, I told you that while this book is fantastic and what Stuart Farmer's done with it over the years is amazing, and it's worth, if you don't have one, to get one. You'd be better off just asking Dossa to tell you what's worth reading in here and what he remembers from it. But look, I appreciate the time. I know many fans are looking forward to watching the game again on Saturday, and I'm sure you are too.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, Doss. I appreciate the time.
Not at all. And good luck to you all. And at this time, can I just pass on a message? Stay safe, look after each other, and I'm sure it won't be long before everybody's back at Welford Road cheering the Tigers on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Doss.
Cheers.